So essentially the first two things I wish I'd done differently were plan much further ahead, and secondly it's about researching, constantly being open to new ideas and not having set expectations. G'day, I'm Debra Caldow. Welcome to the Red Giraffe Solutions Expanding Worlds podcast, where we aim to support you as you help your young person with additional needs plan for their future, a future where they're safe, secure, and live a rewarding and fulfilling life. From around the world, I share stories and I share solutions from people making this possible right now. I'm a parent of a young person with additional needs, so I understand the challenges. Many of the people I've interviewed on this podcast have already helped me design a better future for my daughter, and I hope that they might help you as well to imagine what's possible for your young person. This podcast is made possible by Red Giraffe Solutions, which is a project I'm proud to be part of, supporting families to build a better future for their children. We now have available at Red Giraffe Solutions an online course called Independent Cooking Made Easy. This is a new and unique approach we developed when we realised traditional cooking techniques and recipes were never going to enable our daughter to cook without some support or supervision. It's a safe, simple system that uses no more than 5 ingredients, has no weighing, cutting or chopping, and no lifting of heavy dishes. Each of the 16 recipes in the course includes a step-by-step video of our daughter making the meal, plus a visual recipe card. We developed this for our daughter to solve her challenges with cooking, and every recipe in the course she can and does genuinely cook for herself. You can find a link to the course in this episode's show notes. As we come to the end of another year, it's not only that time that people reflect on the previous year, it's also the time when they look ahead to what's happening next year. And for many young people, this will be a time when they need to start to look at what happens next after they finish school. So I wanted to share something that I talk about when I work with families on helping them develop a life plan for their young people. And it's the things that I wish I'd done differently, the things I wish I'd known earlier, that would have really helped our family when my daughter was at that point of moving from school into the big wide world. When people ask us to help them develop a life plan, most often they are at the point that their children have either left school or they're coming to the end of school. So it's about that next step and what they do next, focusing on how they will start to look at moving into paid employment or finding a purpose to their day, becoming more independent at home, those sorts of things. And then of course life planning around the financial issues and where our young people will live when they no longer live with us. But the transition process from education into the next steps can differ so much for each individual, and that's something that we talk about a lot. So over the next 2 episodes I want to talk about the 4 things that we wish we'd known when it came to our daughter moving on from school. In this episode, I'm talking about 2 of them, and the first one is about planning. If I look back, I always assumed we were pretty good at planning. We decided the mainstream school that she was at wasn't working for her, so we moved her to a school that really met her needs, and that took plenty of planning. But when that happened, I think we got a bit too comfortable. Not that I can blame us, because after years of fighting, sometimes it's just nice to sit back and breathe. But the problem with that is that too soon the next stage comes rushing up, and that's exactly what happened to us. My daughter moved into the college attached to the school that she was at, but we really didn't have a plan of what would happen after she finished at that college. And it was in this period that the podcast also started, and I discovered very quickly there are an awful lot of options out there. One of those options was supported internships, which was the route that my daughter took. But I do think that earlier planning would have made her journey an awful lot easier. Because the reality is that planning ahead shouldn't be for the next year or the next 2 years. It has to be further ahead. When it comes to things like finances for our children, well, we're planning so far ahead we won't even be around when that plan starts to work. In a sense, that's why we developed the Red Giraffe route map, where there are stops on the journey. So although you also identify the end destination, you can see the stops as well on the way there. Looking back, I know that when my daughter was at school, I should have been working on those next stops on the purpose line, like work experience or supported internships. Because by doing that, I could have also helped her develop skills at home that would have made the purpose journey easier and perhaps quicker. Of course, I know she's done okay, more than okay, to be fair, but I also believe that it's always important to reflect on our mistakes and share what we learn, so hopefully someone else can avoid making the same mistakes. So the first thing I'd recommend to any family is to plan further ahead than you think you need to. And part of this is also about expectations. Because when our children are young, we set those expectations. We set the bar, so to speak. And if we set the bar high, then there's much more chance that they'll set the bar high for themselves as well. And that's what they need to do, because we know what the barriers are. But when they believe in themselves, that is setting them up for success. A plan is really just us saying to them, we know you're capable of doing all these things one day. And I say one day because there isn't a minimum speed on this journey. We should go as slow or as fast as we need to, as long as one day we reach our desired destination. The second thing I wish I'd done better is the research. Until I started the podcast, I didn't realise how many options were out there. They weren't all right for my daughter, obviously, but some of them were. And if I'd known about them earlier, I would have planned for them earlier. The more you educate yourself on the options out there, the more likely you are to find the one that's right for your child. And there is one word I would suggest we remove from our vocabulary when we talk about the future for our children, and that's the word realistic. When it comes to talking about our children, that word seems to mean, let's put some boundaries around what's possible. Let's remind ourselves constantly of all the things we can't do and how we can't go past that predetermined point. But neither you or I have any idea what the world would look like in 5 years. I often talk about the role of technology and the important role it plays in my daughter's life. She cooks for herself independently, and a lot of that is down to technology. She looks after herself around the house, and a lot of that is down to technology. And technology is constantly changing. And so I think by talking about being realistic, we're just setting up barriers that don't need to be there. Rather than being realistic, I think we need to recognise constraints. Those constraints that our children have at any one point in their life. And that's important to think about it in terms of that one point in their life. Because what is a constraint to them today will not be something that affects them as much tomorrow. They'll change, and we can be the driving force behind them realising their full potential. Because I'm sure that anyone listening to this podcast is doing as much work as they can on supporting their young person to live as independently as they possibly can. So recognising constraints is important because that allows us to look at the options out there and then evaluate those against what our young people find challenging. And like I said, some options won't be right at a specific point in time, but they may come into play in the future. And things do change. I know, for example, that when my daughter was on her journey towards a supported internship, what she ended up doing is something I never would have expected. Her constraints were that she got quite anxious when she met new people. She found it difficult to talk to new people. And yet, now she's in a role where that's happening every day of the week. She's working in a hotel where she greets new guests all the time. Of course, credit goes to her supported internship provider in building her confidence. But there's also an element there in that she just changed over time. The constraints she had 2 years ago no longer exist. Or if they do, she has learned how to deal with them. So doing the research is key, but also having that realisation that our own expectations of the future could be limiting how feasible we think something is. We really need to be open to new ideas, to listening to what other people are doing, which again is why I constantly talk about the fact that this podcast isn't confined to one country or one type of organisation. I want to talk to everyone because I really don't know what I don't know, but I do know that there's incredible value in sharing with each other. So essentially the first two things I wish I'd done differently were plan much further ahead, not just for the next year or the next part of the journey, but looking at the desired destination and then working back from there. And secondly, it's about researching, constantly being open to new ideas and not having set expectations. In next week's episode, I'll talk about the two other things that we wish we'd done differently. The first one is around the importance of both ability and attitude, and the second is why it's never over, but why it does get an awful lot easier. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope that the stories and solutions shared on here help you as you support your young person to create their future. If you know anyone who would find the ideas useful, please share the podcast with them. To support the podcast, please consider finding out more about the Independent Cooking Made Easy online course. It's a safe, simple system that works. There are links to the course in the show notes. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Debra Caldow. I'd love to have a conversation with you on any of the topics we all care about. Bye for now.